Okay, so obviously if we hadn't missed a couple of Sundays, we might have been doing Palm Sunday this week, but having missed the Sunday that we need to do because it completes the picture of what we were looking at over a couple of weeks of studying together, I didn't want to miss it out. But actually, as I've come to do it...
Passage that we
yeah.
covered, that was great.
I think actually, as I've come to do it, I'm thinking actually it's fine for Palm Sunday because actually this helps us to understand what the misunderstanding was that was happening on Palm Sunday. All right? What the people were expecting, but what Jesus has actually said, what Jesus has been teaching for 3.5 years that they hadn't understood. That's what this is all about, really. So it does sort of fit in, really, in understanding why what looked like one thing on Palm Sunday turned out to be something completely different by the end of the week. So basically, we're going to look. Obviously, we're looking at Jesus in the prophets, and we're in Daniel. And the last Sunday that we were together, we looked at Daniel 2 and Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and we looked and looking at that, we were looking at Jesus as the stone, if you remember, that comes and destroys all the other statues. And Nebuchadnezzar's dream is very much looking at that event, i.e. the coming of Jesus at the end of the age, actually looking at it from a worldly perspective, from the earth, from the view of the earth, of what's going on the earth, all right? Empires that are being crushed, yeah? But the account in Daniel 7 is of exactly the same thing, but it's a view from the heavenly realm, what's going on in heavens, which is why doing that day in the middle about heaven and earth helps us, I think, to understand this more and put it in its right context. As I think you all know, I've absolutely loved unpacking this stuff. It's helped me look at everything in a much more, in a clearer way, I guess, of going, okay, I get it. Yeah. All these mysteries things, which I've spent most of my life saying, God's put mysteries there for us, but he put mysteries there for us to dig in and find out. And I feel like we've opened up a whole load of mystery in the last few weeks. So Daniel 7 is where we're going this morning. And it's one of the things we need to understand is that as we look at how Jesus is portrayed in the prophetic scriptures, and in this particular place, we're going to find a description of him that he referred back to over and over again during his ministry. It's very interesting, Jesus, when we think how many times Jesus referred back, but in code, to Daniel. It was often in code, We see that, don't we, when he talks about, the whatever it's called, desolation, whatever that is. Abomination of desolation. I never get those words together. As in Daniel, it's like Jesus is always saying to him, if you only went back and read Daniel, you'll get what's going on. And the joy is, we know that he said that, and we have looked back, and we are looking at Daniel. And so we can often think, I think, when we look at the prophetic scriptures, that it's all about what's to come. But actually, a lot of it isn't. A lot of it's about what has happened, and also understanding why what's to come is yet to come. So there's this whole putting ourselves into the middle of the story of what God has been doing through the whole of time. So as I said, in this vision, Daniel's seeing events in the heavens, and they're the events of the final spiritual battle between the rebellious sons of God, which is what we talked about, all right? Those sons of God, those spiritual beings who were given over and then ruled and have ruled the nations. So those rebellious sons of God who have dominion over the rebellious nations on the earth. And that's what we're seeing in this vision, how that is dealt with at the end of the age. And that's why, as we read it, you'll see they're described like beasts. In other words, they're corrupt and not as they should be. And they're coming up out of the sea. And that probably now makes sense after our training day, because the sea is that place of chaos and destruction. So that's why this picture is used. It's that place that exists without God's presence. So let's just read Daniel chapter 7, the first few verses. I'm going to leave little bits because we don't need all the full descriptions of the beasts, because our focus today isn't on the beasts, it's on the one who comes. So Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. And behold, another beast, a second one. Oops, not working. Can you see if you can get that? Like a bear. After this I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with four wings of a bird on its back. Behold, a fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful, and exceedingly strong. So these are those same four kingdoms that we saw in Daniel 2, all right, which were described as parts of a statue in Daniel 2, because that was their physical manifestation. This is their spiritual manifestation as beasts, as fallen sons of God who are corrupted, coming out of that corruption and that chaos. And I'm not going to go into those beasts because, as we've said all the way through this, we've covered all that in the End Time Study Group, so you can always go back and check all that through the notes and the videos on the website. But the important thing we need to recognise here, that this is primarily a battle being fought in the heavens. All right, this is a battle in the heavens. And I think it's really interesting that Daniel should give us, we should have chapter 2, which shows us that there is a battle on the earth, but Daniel 7 shows us exactly the same thing, because by the time we get to Daniel 7, what God is now unfolding to Daniel is the spiritual dimensions of all that will happen at the end of the age. And so this is a battle in the heavens that we're looking at. And it helps us, I think, on that day we saw how as the battles are fought in the heaven, so we see them, there's a correlation when we see anything that is disruptive and chaotic and evil and destructive. We know that although it's manifesting on the earth, that is a battle that's going on also in the heavens, and this is just a physical manifestation that we then see on the earth. So let's just remind ourselves from that training day, Yahweh created two realms, the heavens and the earth. Each was populated by a host, and they were created to be images of him within that realm. So the sons of God, in the spiritual beings, are there to bring his glory and his image into the heavens. We, as those who are created of sons of God on the earth, are here to work with him to bring his glory and the manifestation of his presence on the earth. So he created sons of God to co-rule in the heavens and sons of man to co-rule on the earth, working with him. And we found out on that training day that the problem came when the sons of God broke through the boundary and tried to establish their rule and power over the sons of men. And that's what we deal with in our broken world that we now live in. So, bearing in mind that Daniel understands this, that lot stay there and this lot stay here, right? He then sees this in his dream, which is so confusing in the vision. It then says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Daniel's looking at this. What on earth is a son of man doing in heaven? Now we read that and we don't think we see what Daniel is shaken by. But if we understand that they stay there and we stay here, what is one of them down here doing up there? That's the issue that Daniel is now facing. No human is supposed to be able to enter heaven and live. If God wants to meet with humans, he comes down. We don't go up. This being, if he's going to be in the presence of Yahweh, has to be divine. But he looks like a man. How can this man be coming before the throne of the Ancient of Days, not just at any old time, but as He's sitting in judgment in all his power and glory. You know, the court is gathered to make judgment. And here is this man appearing. Why isn't he being completely burnt up and obliterated? Goes on to say this. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. I love that there's wheels on the throne of God. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. This is a significant moment in the divine council. And yet there's a man who's appeared. Can you imagine what Daniel... I mean, it's the same, isn't it, as John in Revelation? Sometimes I think, oh, I'd love to, but I'm not sure I'd want to be Daniel or John.
No.
I don't think I'd cope with it. It's just such... But for some reason, those two men were able to receive. Daniel, because he spent his whole life praying and fasting and before the Lord in prayer. John, because he leant against and understood who he was. God knew who to choose. Okay, so let's start to try and understand this, shall we? Why is there a Son of Man in heaven? Why is he called Son of Man? We know that the most common word in the New Testament and throughout Christian history to refer to Jesus is actually Jesus the Christ or the Messiah. That's the phrase that we use, that the Bible uses the most. But actually, if you read through the 4 gospel accounts and you actually pay attention to what you're reading, you'll see that Christ or Messiah is actually the least used title by Jesus himself. He almost never referred to himself as the Christ or the Messiah. He actually never calls himself Christ or Messiah in public. He only ever does it in private. And even then, it's usually in a sort of an ambiguous or an oblique way. There isn't a sentence where Jesus says, I am the Messiah. When he's asked, he doesn't answer. When he's asked if he is, he doesn't answer. It just never occurs. Jesus never says, I am the Messiah. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he isn't. But when Jesus came, that wasn't the focus of what he was trying to communicate to those he was amongst. There are a handful of stories where other people call him that, and when they do, he immediately calls himself by a different title. He immediately follows that up by saying, the Son of Man. So let's have a look. There's just an example here. Mark 8, this is a very familiar event to us. This is when Jesus goes with his disciples to Caesarea Philippi. And on the way there, he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they told him, John the Baptist. And others say Elijah. And others, one of the prophets. And he asked them, but who do you say that I am? And Peter answered him, you are the Christ, or Messiah. And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. You've recognised that I'm the Messiah, but you need to understand this first. This is coming first. The Son of Man, the revelation of the Son of Man comes first. And when Peter responds by calling him Messiah, Jesus very clearly tells them to tell no one. And then he goes on and teaches about himself as the Son of Man who's going to be rejected or not crucified, but that we know that's where we're going. So why? Well, I think the first thing we need to understand is that the title Messiah was actually very political. It was really loaded politically because it was referring to what the Jewish people saw as the one who would come and destroy all their enemies. What Mike said this morning, when he came in, they were calling him that because they thought he was coming as the son of... They were seeing him as the Messiah, the son of David, who would overcome all their oppressors and establish Israel in her true purpose and plan. So to them, so to the Jewish believers, Messiah meant someone who was coming to destroy their enemies. And to the occupying Romans, that was a significant threat. And there were many people, Jesus didn't call himself the Messiah, and there were many people walking around saying they were the Messiah. There have been many people who had come and said they were the Messiah, who were going to overthrow. Jesus wasn't actually the only one. And of course, in terms of royal overtones, messianic figures could be in Jesus' day people claiming to be the true representative of the ancient kingdom of David. It was about restoring the kingdom of David. Basically, someone coming to say, I'm going to revive our kingdom, I'm going to overthrow Rome, let's go kill some Romans. That was their understanding of Messiah. So no wonder Jesus didn't want that title being the one that was spoken of while he was walking around, because that isn't what he'd come to do at this point. Now, obviously, the apostles after Jesus called him Messiah, but Jesus himself almost never calls himself Messiah. And even when he acknowledges the title, he immediately shifts the topic. So he doesn't say, I'm not, but he shifts the topic focus to him as the Son of Man. And the Son of Man is the phrase that he used most often to talk about himself. So why? Why is Jesus constantly going, I'm the Messiah, but I'm the Son of Man? That's the one I want you to see. That's the one I want you to understand. Where did he get that title from? Well, we're sitting here with the passage in front of us this morning, Daniel chapter 7, obviously. When Jesus is constantly referring to himself as the Son of Man, he's actually alerting his listeners to Daniel's vision. He's actually saying, you want to understand who I am? Back to Daniel 7. Okay, so what have we got in Daniel 7? When Daniel is seeing his vision, what he's seeing is that Eden cosmic mountain that we talked about in our training day, where God dwells on his throne. And as we saw in our training day, humans were invited to share God's throne and rule over the world at the point of creation. The two were one. Heaven and earth were not separate. They were one place where the spiritual beings and God dwelt on the top of this mountain, and man was given his dominion at the bottom of the mountain in the garden. But we also know that when man rebelled, he was expelled out of the garden and no longer had access to that holy mountain. And as we realised on our training day, the whole biblical story is about how God's going to get humans back to that place where they have access, where they share a throne with him. He wants to restore to the throne man to rule with him in the world alongside God. That original Edenic creation. So, Daniel 7 is actually repainting the Garden of Eden in Genesis 1 and 2, that setting that we looked at. And he's depicting the absentee human rulers, and he's making that empty throne is clearly a picture that there's a space that still needs to be filled. There's an empty throne which belonged to man, which man has lost. Hence the image of an occupied throne and an empty throne beside him. You see, what has been needed since Genesis 3, when man had no longer had access to that rule, is a human who can ascend the holy mountain, who can go back to Eden and become the truly human one who will rule the world alongside God. Man lost that at the fall. Man's got to come back into his place. And that's what Daniel's vision is all about. From Genesis 1 onwards, we see God's desire to rule the earth in partnership with humans. But in Daniel's vision, we see that instead of there being a human ruling, there's an empty throne. And you've got wild beasts trampling humans in the world. And Daniel sees this unoccupied throne alongside the flaming Ancient of Days. So here's the scene. There's no one to occupy the throne, and beasts are trampling. It's chaos again. It's destruction again. But then, on a cloud coming up to the throne is one like the Son of Man, a human one. And the human one sits down at the throne. He's actually up in God's territory. That's why Jesus had to go on the clouds. He went on the clouds to arrive on the cloud. He's the cloud rider. He returns on the clouds. He's a cloud rider. And the cloud rider is in Daniel 7. This is how we identify who he is. The one human is elevated out of that trampled mass of humanity, brought up to rule the world alongside the Ancient of Days. And then all the nations are honouring and serving and worshipping this human and the Ancient of Days together. And the Son of Man is given authority over everything, all the nations. So by constantly referring to himself as the Son of Man, Jesus was actually emphasising that although he was human, he was also divine. You see, we often think he's referring to the Son of Man is because he's identifying his humanity. But actually what he's identifying is that he is human but also divine, because he's the Son of Man of Daniel 7. Therefore he will go into heaven. He is both human and divine. Son of Man says he's human and divine. By his death and resurrection, he would be the first human to be able to enter back into Eden and rule with the Ancient of Days. And by doing so, he would open up a way for humanity to regain their true identity and purpose. Because we then participate in what he did, Christ in us gives us access to reign with Yahweh in a restored Eden. Spiritually, at the moment, literally, in the age to come. But Son of Man really does mean that Jesus was also identifying himself as human. When Jesus called himself the Son of Man, he was actually identifying with us as the human race. He's saying, I'm one of you forever. He still is a human. He still is in human form. He didn't suddenly put into something else. He's in human form. That's why the Daniel 7 vision is so important. One like the Son of Man sits down on the throne. With there's a man in heaven. What was a wonderful Rizzo song somewhere there, isn't there? He will be fully God and fully man forever. And Daniel's use of one like the Son of Man speaks of his eternal destiny as a man on the earth. That's why the eternal purposes of God are about heaven coming down onto earth, not us lot going up there. Jesus embraced the frailty of humanity during his time on earth. And it's really interesting because the phrase Son of Man, when it's used in the rest of the Old Testament, refers to weak humans. Actually, Ezekiel used the term nearly 100 times to emphasise his own human frailty. I'm a son of man. Son of Man speaks of frailty and weakness, a weak man made of clay. So it is truly remarkable that the uncreated God became human and took on our weakness. He was hungry, he was tired, he was thirsty. This phrase Son of Man helps us understand that he took on the weakness of man so that he could take his place for all time, for man. Because he's committed to partnership with redeemed humans. His eternal companions are us, human beings. And he's going to bring his bride into the glory that he inherits as a man from the Father. Jesus' glory isn't because he's the Son of God. Jesus' glory is because he became the Son of Man, took on the weakness, and therefore qualified himself to come back and take that seat in heaven as a man. That's where his glory exists. But he's also called the Son of Man to emphasize that he's the only man with the authority to judge, the only one who can sit on that throne with the Father as he opens the books to bring judgment to the earth. As God opens the books to evaluate the human race, so the Son of Man is there with him. Jesus has been appointed as the judge of all the nations. And in that role, he evaluates every person and nation, and then he is the one who will dispense the rewards and the discipline and the judgment, because he knows man. He knows the frailty of man. He can judge perfectly because he has the wisdom of God, but the experience of man. So John 5 tells us, "For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. And he has given him authority to execute judgment, because he is the Son of Man." Without Jesus coming and taking on humanity, conquering the enemy and taking his place back on a throne in heaven, he would not have the authority to execute judgment. It's because of what he has done that he now has that authority. Because it has to be a man, because that's who God gave authority on earth to. The glory is that Jesus restrained most of his judgments while he was on earth the first time, until he bore the judgment for our sin and was raised from the dead, so that we then are not judged as we should be, because we've accepted his judgment in our place. His resurrection declared the price was paid and that it was accepted by God, by Yahweh. And so the elders cry out that he's worthy to release the seals of judgment, because he left all his glory in heaven and came to earth to bear our judgment and pay the debt of our sin. So in Revelation 5, this famous verse that we all know, and they sang a new song saying, "Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation." This is Daniel 7. This is the one on the throne who now can bring judgment to the earth. It's twofold, that message. First, all the enemies of the kingdom will surely be openly defeated. Full and final victory over all our enemies is assured when Jesus comes back. But second, it's that Jesus, in his exaltation, will assume the responsibility of judging or evaluating the human race with significant consequences. He will give out those eternal rewards to the faithful. He will assign temporal and eternal punishment to the Antichrist and all that are part of his empire, because he alone is worthy to release the end time seals of judgment on the Antichrist and his empire. So Jesus, in calling himself the Son of Man, was clearly stating his authority to reign alongside Yahweh with the divine council, which is the picture that we're seeing in Daniel 7. And at his trial, Jesus actually declares that he was the Son of Man. And that is the final straw for the high priest. So let's look at that passage, Matthew 26. "And the high priest stood up and said, 'Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?' But Jesus remained silent. And the high priest said to him, 'I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God.' And Jesus said to him, 'You have said so. But I tell you, From now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy." Son of Man, seated at the right hand of power? Why is that blasphemy? Because this man is saying that he's also divine. This man is saying that he has authority from Yahweh himself. You see, the high priest's question was to ascertain if Jesus was declaring himself to be the Messiah. That's what he wanted to know. Are you the one who's coming and going to overthrow the Romans? Are you going to come and rescue the Jews? Because that's all they were interested in, was the Jews. However, Jesus replies, almost a direct quote from Daniel 7, and he declares that he's not only a man, but he's the man in Daniel 7 who is also divine. And that was blasphemy, declaring that he was God, and as such he had the authority and the power to judge, including judging those Jewish authorities. That's why he got so upset. How dare you say you're God and you can judge me, is actually the issue here. This was the authority that Jesus was establishing throughout his earthly ministry. And it was that continually angered the spiritual leaders in Israel. They had a grasp. So this man was saying he was God. And this was not acceptable. The Messiah didn't have to be God. He was a son of God. All right? He was one who had authority from God. But he was going to be just a man. He was going to be like David. He was going to be a king. We have to get in our heads, that's the understanding of Messiah. Not one who's divine with equal authority as Yahweh himself. So Mark 12 says, "And immediately Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they thus questioned within themselves, said to them, 'Why do you question these things in your hearts? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or to say, rise, take up your bed and walk? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins,' he said to the paralytic, 'I say to you, rise, pick up your bed and go home.'" The Son of Man who has authority on earth. That Son of Man title relates to him having authority on the earth. The authority that Adam and Eve forfeited. You see, as Son of God, he's always had authority in heaven alongside Yahweh. But now he's demonstrating he has authority on earth because he's taken on human flesh. So now he can be a man with that authority, as Adam was originally intended to be. See it again in Mark 2, on the Sabbath. On Sabbath he was going through the cornfields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck ears of corn. And the Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath." See, the Sabbath was created for Adam's sake. At the end of creation, God declares Sabbath rest. From then on, man should have been able to rest in the fullness of all that God had done and rule with him on the earth. Jesus is saying, this was created for me. Yeah. It's for me to decide what I do with Sabbath because it was created for me. The Sabbath was built into the structure of the world that was made subject to Adam. Therefore, Adam's final son, the Son of Man, Jesus Christ, who has recovered dominion that his great forefather had forfeited, is the Lord of the Sabbath. It's Jesus establishing his authority on earth, is what Son of Man means. Okay, so let's try and pull all that together a little bit. So Jesus' title, Son of Man, establishes his divine authority as a man. At his first coming, that authority was shown through the things that he did that only a divine, authorised Son of Man could do on the earth. miraculous signs and wonders, and his death on the cross. His authority, when he came the first time, was demonstrated by serving others and laying down his life for them. So Mark 10 says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." You see, like his great ancestor Adam before the fall, the son of Adam had the right and the authority to be served. You know, the animals were brought to him for him to name. He had authority to serve, but as the ruler of all creatures on the earth. But instead of exercising this right, the Son of Man actually becomes the slave of all humanity because he can choose to do so, even to the point of dying for them. And in doing that, he actually reversed the effect of Adam's sin, the death which he passed on to his offspring. And so the one son of Adam, Jesus, has given his life as a ransom for the many children of Adam who were deprived of their life by the transgression of that first human, Adam. So Jesus gives back to us that which we lost, which means we now too have authority and power as sons of God to live on this earth as he did with that authority when he came the first time. We have that authority to serve others and give of our lives for their sake, and to see miracles and signs and wonders, and to lay down our lives for others. Because we are sons of men, but by what he has done, we have his authority within us. But that authority needs to be exercised in the way that he exercised it when he was on earth, while heaven and earth are still separated.
Yeah.
Because the fullness of bringing the two together hasn't yet come. So we read in Mark 8, "And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, 'If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me.'" In other words, if anyone would be a son of man, as I am a son of man, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. You see, the way we show that we are son of men, that we are in Christ and we have that authority, is by laying down our lives as he did. But the title Son of Man also identifies him as the coming warrior king who will judge and evaluate the human race and reign over the earth with his people to his Father's glory. So we know there is that to come as well. You see, the Daniel vision sees him brought up onto the throne, which is what happened with his first coming. But then the vision goes on to show us that what he does is then come back and destroy. Daniel saw a man approaching God's throne, travelling on supernatural heavenly clouds to be commissioned as the ruler of all the nations in partnership with the redeemed. And this is where the big difference between Messiah and Son of Man occurs as well. So let's just look at Daniel 7. Just remind ourselves of this. "I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like the Son of Man. He came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High," or the holy ones of the Most High. "Their kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey them." In other words, here we see it. Those who come into his kingdom have the same authority over all the kingdoms of the earth. So Daniel saw a man seemingly defying what God told Moses about no man seeing God face to face and living. He was so near to God, yet without any danger. And to this man was given dominion over all the nations on earth. Now this is the thing that's surprising to Daniel. Because if he was only the Messiah, the understanding of Messiah as the son of David was that he was coming to rule over Israel, to restore Israel.
Not the world.
But Daniel sees him reigning over every nation forever. This is the upgrade. You see, Jesus deeply desires his people to rule with him. He doesn't need us. Yahweh and Jesus alone could do the whole thing. But he desires us to be with him because we are his eternal companion. We were created for that purpose. We were created to rule and bring his glory to the earth. When Jesus, as a man, reached this pinnacle of participation with God on the earth, it was a breakthrough for the human race. And he now beckons us to come with him. Part of the good news is that a man made a way, as we celebrate every week, for other humans to participate in what is so dear to the Father and was man's intended purpose. And that purpose is filling the earth with his glory. John 17, Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, may be with me where I am, to see my glory that you have given me, because you loved me before the foundation of the world. Revelation 3:21, the one who conquers, I will grant him to sit with me on my throne, as I also conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. The worthy one received what he is worthy of. And part of what he received is his partnership restored with his bride. The empty throne which he occupied is now shared with us as his bride. So Revelation 5 again, and they sang a new song saying, worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain. And by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. And you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth. It will go back. Eden will be restored. Jesus said to them, Matthew 19, truly I say to you, in the new world, when the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. There's a place for those who are faithful to him in the age to come. You see, when Jesus spoke of his return to earth, he almost always mentioned coming on the clouds. In this way, he would be seen by all the nations. It's Jesus, the Son of Man, who's the cloud rider of Daniel 7. And as Mike reminded us this morning, we will come with him. As we read in Revelation 1, behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. And all tribes of the earth will wail on account of him. Even so, amen. You see, if he was just the Messiah, it would have been for Israel. Yeah. But he wasn't. He was the Son of Man who had come for the whole earth. Matthew 24, all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Jesus is coming on the clouds. He went on the cloud to take his place, and he will return on a cloud to sit on his throne in Jerusalem to rule the whole earth as that which God has always desired, heaven and earth restored again to an Edenic to Eden, to a cosmic mountain on which God is worshipped. That mountain, the city of Jerusalem, at the heart of the earth. A restored heaven and earth back to its original form. He's coming on the clouds, the Son of Man.